3 months ago, my son-in-law was begging me for help, crying that he'd made a terrible mistake. 6 months ago, he was telling my daughter I was a dangerous man who needed to be removed from their lives. But our story really begins on their wedding day, when Colton made the error that would cost him everything. My name is Gabriel Blackwell, and at 48 years old, I thought I understood people. As the owner of a successful construction company in Seattle, I dealt with every type of personality, from honest contractors to smooth-talking con artists. But nothing prepared me for the kind of psychological warfare my son-in-law would wage against my family. Brielle had always been my pride and joy. At 27, she was building a successful career as an interior designer, and her creativity never ceased to amaze me. She had this infectious laugh and an optimistic view of the world that made everyone around her feel better about life. When she started dating Colton Merrick 2 years ago, I tried to be supportive, even though something about him didn't sit right with me. Colton was 30, worked in social media marketing, and had the kind of polished charm that made people instantly trust him. He knew exactly what to say in every situation, always had the perfect response, and seemed genuinely interested in everyone he met. But that's what bothered me. It felt too perfect, too calculated. During family dinners, I noticed subtle things. The way Colton would gently correct Brielle's stories, adding important details she'd missed. How he'd suggest she was being too emotional when she got excited about work projects. The way he'd smile and nod when she spoke, but his eyes would be scanning the room, already planning his next comment. I kept these observations to myself. The last thing I wanted was to be the overprotective father who couldn't let his daughter make her own choices, but I started paying closer attention to their dynamic, and what I saw made me increasingly uncomfortable. Brielle began changing in small ways. She stopped talking about her friends as much, started declining invitations to family gatherings, and seemed to always check Colton's reaction before expressing an opinion. When I'd call her, conversations that used to last an hour were suddenly cut short, with excuses about Colton needing her for something. The engagement came after 18 months of dating. Colton proposed at a romantic restaurant with a ring that must have cost him a small fortune. Everyone was thrilled, but I noticed how quickly he started taking control of the wedding planning. He had opinions about everything: the venue, the guest list, the flowers, even Brielle's dress choices. Brielle would constantly defer to his judgment, claiming he had such great taste and was helping her make better decisions. That phrase started appearing in her vocabulary more and more. It replaced her natural confidence with a constant need for validation that I'd never seen before. 3 weeks before the wedding, I made a decision that would temporarily cost me my relationship with my daughter. I asked Brielle to have lunch with me alone, something that had become increasingly rare. "Brielle, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer," I said carefully. "Are you happy? I mean, genuinely happy with who you're becoming?" Her face went through several expressions. Confusion, then defensiveness, then something that looked almost like relief before settling on anger. "Dad, what are you saying? That I don't know my own mind? That I'm not capable of growing as a person?" I tried to explain that I just noticed she'd changed, that she used to be so decisive and confident in her own opinions. But she accused me of being jealous and controlling, unable to accept that she was building her own life. She insisted that Colton loved her and helped her see things more clearly, helped her make better choices. The conversation spiraled from there. For the remaining weeks before the wedding, Brielle barely spoke to me. Colton, meanwhile, was perfectly polite but cold, treating me like an obstacle he had to tolerate rather than family he wanted to connect with. The wedding day itself was beautiful, and Brielle looked radiant. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching my daughter disappear into someone else's vision of who she should be. During the reception, I approached Brielle one last time to try to bridge the gap between us. I told her she looked beautiful and that all I wanted was for her to be happy. She insisted she was happy and wished I could just accept that Colton made her happy instead of constantly looking for problems. That's when Colton appeared beside her, his arm sliding possessively around her waist. "Mr. Blackwell, I think Brielle's made it clear that she doesn't appreciate your concerns about our relationship. Maybe it's time to respect her wishes and give us some space." The dismissive tone in his voice, the way he spoke for Brielle rather than letting her handle the conversation herself, confirmed every instinct I'd had about his controlling nature. "Colton, I was talking to my daughter." "And now you're talking to her husband," Colton replied smoothly. "Brielle doesn't need your negativity in her life anymore. She has a family now that actually supports her decisions." But here's where Colton made his fatal mistake. As he was speaking to me, his phone rang. Without thinking, he answered it while still standing next to us. "Hey, beautiful," he said into the phone, his voice dropping to an intimate tone. "I can't wait to see you later tonight." He caught himself immediately realizing what he'd just said in front of Brielle and me. His face went pale as he looked at both of us. He stammered that it was his cousin, that they had a family gathering later, that his family just talked that way. But the damage was done. I'd heard the tone, seen the panic in his eyes. This wasn't a family member. This was someone else. Someone Colton was planning to see on his wedding night. Brielle looked confused and hurt, but Colton quickly recovered his composure and told me it was time for me to leave, that I'd caused enough drama for one day. Brielle didn't contradict him. She just stood there looking lost and uncertain, while her new husband essentially banished her father from their wedding reception. I left that night knowing I'd witnessed something significant, but not knowing how to use that information to help my daughter. The next morning, Brielle called me with a message that felt like a physical blow. She'd thought about everything that happened and made a decision. She couldn't have someone in her life who didn't respect her choices or her marriage. Colton was her family now, and she needed to protect that. She didn't want to see me anymore. I tried to tell her I loved her and just wanted what was best for her, but she said what was best was a fresh start, without people who brought negativity and doubt into her marriage. She told me not to contact her again and hung up. Over the next few days, I discovered the extent of my exile from Brielle's life. She blocked me on all social media platforms. My calls went straight to voicemail. When I tried to reach out through other family members, they told me Brielle had asked them not to share information about her life with me. For 3 months, I lived with the pain of that separation, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake by expressing my concerns or if my instincts about Colton had been right. I had no way of knowing what was happening in Brielle's marriage, no way to check on her well-being. But I couldn't forget that phone call at the wedding. Something wasn't right, and I needed to find a way to protect my daughter, even if she currently believed I was the enemy. The solution came through Brielle's college roommate, Madison Pierce, who had also noticed changes in Brielle's behavior. Madison called me 3 months after the wedding, expressing serious concern about Brielle's complete isolation from all her friends. When Madison tried to make plans, Brielle said she needed to check with Colton first. During their rare hangouts, Brielle apologized constantly for everything. Her opinions, her laugh, even ordering food without asking what Colton would want her to eat. Madison had tried talking to Brielle about it once, but Brielle got defensive, saying Colton was helping her become more mature and thoughtful, and that people who didn't understand their relationship were just jealous. It sounded like she was repeating something she'd been told to say. Madison and I developed a plan to approach Brielle together. We would meet her at a neutral location and gently express our concerns without making her feel attacked or judged. But before we could arrange that meeting, Madison called me with urgent news. Brielle had called her crying, having found intimate messages on Colton's phone from someone named Amber. When she confronted him, he convinced her it was nothing, that this woman was just obsessed with him and he was trying to let her down easy. Madison didn't believe that explanation, and neither did I. More importantly, Madison said Brielle sounded broken, like she didn't trust her own judgment anymore. That night, I received a call I never expected. Brielle's number appeared on my phone for the first time in months. "Dad?" Her voice was small, uncertain. "Brielle, honey, are you okay? I think I made a mistake. A really big mistake." Over the next hour, Brielle told me about the systematic way Colton had isolated her from friends and family, convinced her that her natural instincts were wrong, and made her question every decision she wanted to make independently. She realized he'd told her I was trying to control her, that I couldn't accept that she was an adult, but now she understood he was the one controlling her. He'd made her feel like she couldn't trust her own thoughts. She was scared because she didn't know who she was anymore, didn't know what she actually thought or felt about anything. 2 weeks later, Colton appeared at my office, looking disheveled and desperate. The confident, charming man I'd met 2 years earlier was gone, replaced by someone who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Blackwell, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice cracking. I led him into my office, curious to see what he had to say. He broke down immediately, admitting he'd made a terrible mistake. He claimed he loved Brielle but had problems with commitment and honesty. He'd been seeing Amber before the wedding and couldn't bring himself to end it. He explained that Brielle wouldn't talk to him anymore, had moved back in with Madison and was filing for divorce. He'd lost her and knew it was his fault, but he also knew I was the only person whose opinion she really trusted. "You want me to convince her to take you back?" He begged me to tell her he was getting help, going to therapy, committed to changing. He knew he didn't deserve it, but he was desperate. I stood up and walked to my office window, looking out at the Seattle skyline where my daughter was somewhere rebuilding her life and her sense of self. "Colton, let me tell you what I think happened here. I think you targeted my daughter specifically because she was trusting and came from a loving family. I think you saw her confidence as something that needed to be broken down so you could rebuild her in a way that served your needs." Colton started to protest, but I held up my hand. "I think that phone call at your wedding wasn't a mistake. It was arrogance. You thought you had Brielle so completely under your control that you could take calls from your mistress right in front of her and she'd believe whatever explanation you gave her." His face told me I was right. "Here's what's going to happen, Colton. You're going to sign the divorce papers without contest. You're going to leave Brielle alone to heal from what you've done to her. And if you ever try to contact her again or manipulate her into coming back, I will make sure everyone in your professional and personal life knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Colton left my office that day looking like a man who'd finally faced the consequences of his actions. 6 months later, Brielle and I were having dinner at our favorite restaurant, slowly rebuilding the relationship that Colton had tried to destroy. She apologized for pushing me away when I was trying to protect her, but I told her she didn't owe me anything. Colton was a professional manipulator who knew exactly how to make her doubt everyone who might question his behavior. She thanked me for never stopping my watch over her, for finding a way to be there when she needed me, even when she'd told me she didn't want to see me anymore. I smiled at my daughter, grateful that her strength and intelligence had ultimately saved her from a life of manipulation and control. That's what fathers do. We watch out for our children, even when they don't realize they need watching out for. 3 months ago, my son-in-law was begging me for help, crying that he'd made a terrible mistake. What he didn't understand was that his biggest mistake wasn't the affair. It was underestimating a father's love and a daughter's strength. Sometimes the people who try hardest to destroy family bonds only end up making them stronger.